excited. I got to use it the first time on Monday, so.
Okay, if everybody will find their seats, we'll go ahead and get started. Call the meeting to order. Start with roll call.
Commissioner Allen.
Present.
Commissioner Norwood.
Present.
Commissioner Azell.
Here.
Commissioner Waddell is absent. Commissioner Stallings.
Here.
Commissioner Funk.
Here.
Mayor Pankinen.
Here. All right. Thank you. Item number 2, at the Commissioner's request, discuss any item of concern on the regular session agenda of January 21st, 2021. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to study items. Number 3, study items 3.1, present the 2019-2020 Independent Auditor's Report on the financial statements of the City of Enid and its related authorities.
All right, Mayor and Commissioners, I'm going to go ahead and visit with you briefly about the audit report, because I know what you really want to hear from is our auditor, Mike Gibson, who is here in the audience tonight. And he can come up here and talk to you about his reports and what he found. We did have one finding I'll talk briefly about. But what I wanted to say is, first of all, you have a copy of the audit. You've had a copy of the audit electronically, at least for a while, but here's a hard copy if you want one. If you don't, we'll take those back up, and because there's people that still ask us to mail them copies of audits. And there's also a memo directly to the governing body that talks about the auditor's report. And so there's a copy of that for you, and you've seen that before too. What I want to start out by saying, and I'm going to try to keep my remarks short, I just want to look through a few things on the audit. The audit report has a lot of information for the city. And what I'm going to use this as my slides. Again, just to spare everybody. My summary is the city's in good financial condition. We're in good financial condition for many, many reasons. And one of them is because of good management and good governing oversight. We do have a really big project that we've been working towards for 5 or 6 years. I think that's reflected in here, the Call Lake Water Supply Project. And so pretty much everywhere you see in here, net assets are increasing, fund balances are increasing, cash balances and investments are increasing, and that's really all good. And it's good for the city. However, the city has lots of needs. And so as you know, one of the things we'll be working on is infrastructure. We're going to talk about some of that tonight. But anyway, let's take a quick look. Just to give you a quick summary, on page 1 and 2 is the auditor's report on the financial statements. He can talk to you about that. But I think he's going to tell you it's the best assurance you can get that the financial statements are fairly stated. The next probably 10 pages or so, starting on page 3 of your audit report, are what's called a management discussion and analysis. And that information has management's perspective on certain things like why balances went up or went down. It lists more detail than you might just get from the financial statements, and it also offers 2 years worth of data. So you can see what 2019 was like and what 2020 was like. And what I call 2020, the 19-20 year is the 20 year. So probably the first thing I'd like you to look to is turn to page 6. Just quickly on the audit report, there's a nice summary report of net position for the city. And that's based on what's called a government-wide basis, which is if the city was a business, this rolls up everything. So if you'll look at the right-hand column at the top and scroll on down, you can see what total assets are for the city. You can see what they were in 19, 457 million. They increased to 481 million in 2020, and so on and so forth. You can see what the liabilities are. Liabilities actually went down a little bit from 197 million to 196. And And at the very bottom, you see total net position, which is an indication of the health of the city. We increased that's about 10% from 263 million to 290 million of total net assets. And you can see out of that almost 40 million is unrestricted. So that's good stuff too. If you flip over or look at the next page, that breaks down the statement of activity. So you can see what revenues are for the city. Again, the right-hand totals column is a quick snapshot. In 2019, we went from 98 million in revenue to 101 million. Several reasons for that, like increasing water rates and things like that. You can see the various expenses of the city. Overall, they get categorized in different categories. And at the very bottom, you can see total expenses did go up from about 88 million to 93.7 million. And on down, you can see increase in net position, you can see was $26.9 million. So that's a good number. That's a good positive number. And that's how we end up at $290 million overall. So that's a government-wide snapshot. That's looking at everything. The city we really just do this in the audit because it's a requirement for one thing, but it is a nice snapshot of the city. The city really runs based on funds. And those funds break down into different categories. Governmental funds, proprietary funds. So as we drill through the management discussion and analysis, there's a further breakdown on certain aspects like capital assets. If you look at page 10, it tells you what we value land on the books in the city of Enid. As of June 30th, 2020, we had $14.2 million valued in land. You can see construction in progress is 35 million. A healthy chunk of that is going to be related to Call Lake. And then you can see the assets that are already built, like buildings, improvements, which are street, equipment, vehicles. Anyway, you can see the bottom line there is we went from 254 million of net assets to 266. Next page is important too. I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. I know you've had some time to look at it, you may have some questions now or later, but debt's a good thing to take a look at. Debt went up a little bit, as you would expect, because we've taken on a lot of debt for Call Lake, but we've also rolled off some debt. One of the debts that rolled off in January, I believe, of this year was the money that was borrowed to help pay for this building renovation. And so that's fantastic. As you know, we borrowed $200 million just a few weeks ago, and that will show up in the next audit. And in fact, I don't recall if we have a footnote in here or not, but if we're required to, we do. So that's all management discussion stuff. The next section, for about the next 15, 20 pages are the actual financial statements themselves. So if you want to see, how the government-wide statements broken down, that's on page 13, and it just breaks down. Now, the benefit you get from looking at management discussion analysis, you just see 2 years worth of data rolled up. Here, you're just looking at this year ended June 30, 2020. It tells you the same stuff. At the bottom right-hand corner, $290 million of total net position, almost 40 million of unrestricted funds. Next page is a statement of activities, which is kind of like an income statement. It breaks down expenses for the various different areas. And again, a bottom line number. If you go to the bottom, change in net position, you can see total net position change was an increase of 26.9 million. But that breaks down into what's called government activities and business activities when you look at the government-wide. Government activities are things like administration, accounting, departments that don't necessarily generate revenues. Your business type activities are the utilities, for instance, the airport, the golf course, things that generate revenue. If you keep going through those financial statements, you will see, it's like starting with page, looks like 16, you see the governmental funds breakdown of the statement of revenues and expenses. And so, and then it goes into proprietary and fiduciary. The fiduciary funds specifically are where our retirement accounts, our CLEAT funds, court funds, that's where they're accounted for. So it's a good story as you look through that. It's really only about 10 pages worth of basic financial statements. The rest of this audit report is there's a whole lot of footnotes. And in those footnotes, there's a whole lot of information. If you want to see the breakdown, for instance, on what the debt of the city is and how that all adds up, you can scroll, or you can flip through pages or scroll and look at the total debt of the city. You can look at the breakdown. There's pages and pages in here about our pension plans and breakdowns. And then there's some required supplementary information, which is a further breakdown of what's called non-major funds. Because you'll see in these basic financial statements, we only have a few major funds, it's called, and Mike can tell you about how that gets defined, but the general fund's one of them, the Enid Municipal Authority is one of them. There's not a whole lot of them. Most funds are end up being minor based on the amounts of revenue and assets they have. The reports, I believe, are all unmodified reports. Mike's going to talk about those. There was one finding. I do want to talk about that a little bit, and then Mike can talk about it some more. And then I want to answer your question, or I actually have Mike talk, and we'll try to answer your questions. I want to go ahead and just move to the back of the report. Page 96. Summary schedule of prior audit findings. Last year, there were no audit findings. That's great. That's what we strive for. But there's a whole lot of complex stuff that goes on trying to account for a city and roll everything up. And this year we had one finding, and that's on page 98. And on page 98, the auditor notes his finding here, and he can talk to you more about it, but it really, it's focused on internal control over financial reporting. And specifically what he's talking about is they found what they believe to be a material weakness that they're reporting to you and to us, and you can read what it's about. It's essentially about construction in progress on Call Lake expenditures that were, I believe, subsequent to the year in question, but applicable to the year in question. And initially, we failed to pick up some of those items and capitalize them. That's basically what that's saying. And you can see that he goes into talking about complexity of the entries and the people that are reviewing them. He can speak more to you about that. There's also, the second thing was something called deferred outflows, which is actually applicable, I believe it was to the police pension fund. I've already told you in previous years, when I went through accounting school, they didn't even know what a deferred outflow was. That was something that was discovered subsequent to my time in accounting. So I always think about it skeptically, but the profession is always looking for things, and Mike can explain to you what a deferred outflow is. But anyway, we have been accounting for those for quite some time since the standard came out that required us to. And this year, for some reason, we didn't initially calculate the police part correctly. As you know, the police pension plan is a state plan. So we take their plan and we take the percentage that's applicable to us, and then we do our calculations to figure out what those deferred amounts are. Anyway, so you can see what our corrective action plan is too, that we reported to the auditor and to the world in this. It's on page 100. And it basically talks about in those, in picking up those amounts to ensure that the financial statements are correct, we do adjusting entries. There's about 50 adjusting entries made on various accruals, deferrals, and things like that, like pension outflows, construction in progress, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, you can see what the corrective action plan is. I think it's good. And for you and for the public and everybody else, for me, next year when the auditor comes, they will be looking to see, did we fix this problem? And they will report to you on that. So in a nutshell, assets are increasing, cash balances are increasing, fund balances are increasing. We're in good shape to take on the Call Lake water supply project and other capital projects that we know are necessary in our city. And I got to say, great job to the accounting staff. I think most of them who are here, Aaron, who couldn't be here right now, heavily involved. Jennifer Smith. Jennifer, where are you? You're over here. Raise your hands. There's the real stars putting this thing together, working with the audit team. Mandy and Marlon, Annette, Lana, Annie and Angela, others that can't or aren't here tonight. But I always forget how painful, how much work it is to put all this together. And it's a lot of work for the auditor to go through and give you this assurance So with that, do you have any questions for me before Mike Gibson comes up and tells you what he thinks?
So our unrestricted net position went up by $27 million. Sorry, unrestricted net position went up less. The not unrestricted, the net position period
Yes.
increased by 27 million. But the
Yes.
unrestricted net position increased by 13%. I don't entirely understand how our unrestricted net position increased while we were borrowing, spending money to the extent we were. Can you explain that bit?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the page. Are you looking at the management discussion analysis?
Look at page 6.
Page 6, okay, yep.
Numbered page 6, not the PDF page 6. I mean, and the reason I ask is up to this point, so much of what we have been positioning ourselves prior to the borrowing was to increase that unrestricted net position, that number was really important for financing. And obviously that financing secured now, but it's you guys have been drilling into us the importance of that unrestricted net position as a measure of the city's general financial health. And that increase, if you just explain where that increase came from, I don't entirely understand.
Well, I believe that, and we probably have an explanation in here. I know that our sales taxes were higher than we had budgeted. I think we referenced that in here somewhere.
I thought that we were prepared for our unrestricted fund balance to decrease as.
Well, the real answer is fantastic management at City Hall.
Yeah.
But delving in a little bit more, revenues have been higher, as you can see, because overall revenues went from 98 million to 101 million. And so any portion of that is not restricted will end up in unrestricted. I mean, it's going to be offset if you spend more money in expenses, but overall.
So it's just from increase in sales tax revenue?
I think there's probably more to it than that, and I'm probably going to have to research it a little bit more.
Okay.
And probably that means my staff backing me
That's fine.
up. And if we can get you the answer tonight, we'll come back and give it to you. Otherwise, we'll probably have to come back to you later with that answer.
I understand the other net position increase in as much as we're acquiring assets on the books, and that I get that part. But that unrestricted net position, yeah, if you would elaborate at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Mike, you want to come on up? Mike Gibson has been our auditor for the entire time that we have been with RSM. And I forget all the names that we've gone through to get to RSM, but Mike has been a constant. We've been with RSM for about 7 years. I think this may be the 7th year. And I believe we have a good relationship. Of course, it's an independent relationship that Mike can explain to you. And Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'll sit right here in case there's questions for me.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm glad to be here and to talk about the 2020 audit. Gerald did say that I would go in and explain deferred inflows and deferred outflows to you. I will if you want me to, but if you really don't want me to, I won't. So, okay. Gerald did a really good job of going over the financial statements, the management's discussion and analysis, and those kinds of things. I'll tell you about the audit is really it's two parts of the audit. It's the audit of the city's financial statements, and it's also the audit of the city's federal programs. And so I want to talk about both of those. So Gerald mentioned that our opinion was an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. That is the highest level of assurance that you can give. Or that we can give, and that means that we believe the financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and are free of material misstatement due to error or fraud. And so, but I want to break that opinion down a little bit further because Gerald did mention between major funds and non-major funds. And so we opine or we design our audit procedures and issue opinions as on the following statements. and I'll ask you to turn to the actual statements. On page 13 and 14, those are the government-wide financial statements. And we issue an opinion on the governmental activity column and on the business type activities column. So when we're auditing, we're designing our audit procedures so that we can tell you that the amounts in the governmental activities column are fairly stated. We can tell you that the amounts in the business type activities column are fairly stated. And that spills over to page 14 also, the statement of activities. Going to page 15 and 16, that's the governmental fund statements. So you'll see general fund, police fund, fire fund, water capital improvements fund, and non-major governmental funds. The general fund, police fund, fire fund, and water capital improvement funds are all major funds. So our opinion drills down to those levels. So we're telling you the general fund is always a major fund. If it had, if you spend everything in it and it had, virtually no balance sheet at the end of the year, it would still be a major fund. The other funds get defined just based upon their relative, significance to all of the funds combined. And so police fund and fire fund, water capital improvements funds all meet that significance column. The non-major governmental funds are an aggregate of a bunch of smaller funds that roll up into this, and they get aggregated, and we issue an opinion over everything else. We kind of aggregate everything else and say, okay, everything else combined is fairly stated as well. But we don't our audit procedures aren't designed down to those individual fund levels. Then I flip back to pages 18 through 21 are the proprietary funds, and the Enid Municipal Authority is a major fund, and then there's an aggregation of non-major enterprise funds, and those are all aggregated in with the non-major governmental funds, with the internal service fund, with the fiduciary funds. We do audit procedures over all of those, but they all get aggregated into one. Anyway, our opinion on all of those respective, what we call opinion units, was unmodified. So, because the audit is in accordance with, the audit's performed in accordance with auditing standards issued by the American Institute of CPAs, also auditing standards issued by the government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. And the government auditing standards require that we perform additional procedures over the internal controls over financial reporting and on compliance with laws, regulations, et cetera, contracts, et cetera, that non-compliance with which could have a material effect to the financial statements. I want to point out, so that could cover a variety of things. We, review state statutes, but one of the major things that our audit procedures cover is, you mentioned debt service. You've got a lot of debt, taking on a lot of debt, revenue bonds, et cetera. I'd like to ask you to turn to page 88, not of the PDF, but of the actual report. That's the schedule of debt service coverage, and that's one of one of your biggest compliance requirements. It's not a state law, but it's certainly a contractual requirement that you maintain 125% debt service coverage ratio. And so we test that, and as you can see, you were at 353% for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020. So you were in compliance. But that, that would certainly be an issue that if you were not in compliance, we would be reporting on that. As it is, the schedule is in here for your information, and we do audit procedures around this on this schedule to ensure we don't issue an opinion on it, but we just make sure that the amounts are derived from the amounts that we audit, from the financial statements that we audit. As Gerald mentioned, we did have a internal control finding this year. Our concern was primarily one of segregation of duties. A lot of like Gerald mentioned, a lot of complex calculations go into determining your financial statements. And, you had a key individual who's, a lot of it rested in one key individual. And there were some things that just normally don't get missed, and they did this year. And we felt obligated to report it. We were required to report it, not obligated to report it. We were required to report it under auditing standards. And we just think that the city's corrective action plan, you know, if they follow through with that, should take care of that. And as Gerald mentioned, one of the things we will be required to do next year is audit. Did the city implement that corrective action plan? And if they did, then that finding will go away. If they did not, the finding will repeat. So,
in that corrective action plan is basically, as I read it, to spread out some of those duties that one person was carrying, so that there was some more likely to catch errors. But my assumption is that will require additional net staff time. And as much, do you, based on your experience with the city's financial office, do you think as it sits today that we have adequate staff and adequately trained staff to comply with the plan, right there, to comply with the plan as it's presented?
I think, to be honest, I didn't audit that procedure all the way through to see if that's there. I think that the training I think that if the training starts now and it can get I think there's probably the training is what needs to happen with some of the areas, is that, one of the things that is challenging in a lot of these is that, as Gerald mentioned, a lot of the stuff is something you only do once a year. The city only prepares a full set of, GAAP financial statements once a year. And so, the training, it's, if you're only doing it one time, it's hard to get trained. So I think that there can be some training that's applied, and certainly, our firm can help with training, just, talking about the schedules and stuff like that without going across the independence lines or doing the calculations themselves. Mm-hmm.
So you believe that with the staffing level we have now in our financial department, that we should be able to manage?
I believe so. Okay. Because the nature of the errors were such that I think it was just not understanding what was required. Once you explain what's required, I think it can be done. So, okay. or in one case, it was just missing something that has been done in previous years. It was just missing. So, okay. So, did I say that right?
Yeah. Do we need to be starting to prepare our financial statements earlier? I mean, is it a time issue, do you think?
There are certain things that may be able to be done earlier. Certain things cannot be done earlier. I mean, sure. A lot of the things can't be done until the city closes its books, and the city, there are certain timelines that the city can close its books. There are probably some schedules, some work papers that can be done ahead of time, and that's something that we can communicate with city accounting staff about. So
I know in some past years we've struggled with the timing of getting our financial statements prepared in a timely manner and getting the audit prepared in a timely manner. This seems like this was all done kind of on the timeline that we shoot for. Did everything go smoothly? Did we? I say that with a great caveat that 2020 was a god-awful year for everyone. So,
right.
But with that giant caveat.
And the answer is yes.
Okay.
I mean, the answer is, given the fact that your chief financial officer was limited in the amount of work that she was able to do, given the fact that there was a pandemic and we, things were harder to get done. I mean, it was just a lot. So I would say that the audit went great. The audit went well under any circumstance, but given everything else, I'd say the audit went great. I mean, great. we did come down to the end, but we got it done. We always, it's been several years. I mean, several years ago we had some challenges, but the last few years, we've had a really good timeline. We've agreed to the timeline with management up front, and there's enough communication back and forth that, obviously, and I say obviously, you say we're gonna have this by this date. The city says they'll have this to us by this date. We say we'll have this to you by this date. And are we 100% across the board every year? No, not this year, not every year, or, not any year do we always hit each date, but there's always enough communication that says, okay, well, we're not gonna have this to you on the 15th of October, but you'll have it by the 18th, and we adjust, and that's the kind of time frame. So it's the communication that's the key on that. And just having a timeline and having it flexible enough that if from some reason a day or two gets missed, we don't miss the ultimate goal, which is to issue the audit in December of the fiscal year. So,
One last question.
Sure.
We've had RSM doing our audit for, I'm not sure how many consecutive years now, several. And I remember when the last time we looked at the hiring the auditor, there was some concern of, do we need to have somebody else do it periodically? Do we need to, and I know you're obviously you folks do a good job and I'm sure would like to keep the work, but just talk to me for a minute about, is it a best practice to switch up companies periodically in the industry, since you cover all kinds of cities?
As an auditor, if you're my client, the answer is no. The best practice, I think, is to understand the firm that you're working with and understand their quality, their system of quality control. We provide you every year when we provide you with our engagement letter. We're required to have an audit every 3 years, and we provide you with a copy of that audit report every year, or we provide it with you every year, but we're only required to have it every 3 years. Our most recent one was for our fiscal year is April 30, and it was for fiscal year April 30, 2019. It was an unmodified opinion with no comments or no issues. And so, so I feel like our systems of quality controls are there and in place. One practice that we see a lot, and we'll offer this to you at any time, is rotation of staff. I mean, here's two things that we do. Number one is, I've been the engagement partner on the audit. When we first became your auditor, we were Colin Reed, we're a local CPA firm in Oklahoma City. We were acquired by RSM at the end of 2014. So we've done the audit as RSM from June 30, 15 forward. Since we've become RSM, those policies and procedures require that we have a partner, and that partner has rotated, but we have a partner that's not sitting in the Oklahoma City office, review the audit file and the financial statements, and ensure that we're following all of the auditing standards, that we're following all of our policies and procedures, and provides that second set of eyes. That partner is not part of the engagement team. They're in the firm, but they're not part of the engagement team, or out here doing audit work or anything like that. And so that's one of our key controls that we have to ensure that our audits are following the policies and procedures that we need to have. So
just to put it really bluntly, we are not out of compliance with the best practice for municipal audits by having the same firm do it for so many consecutive years.
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
So thank you. Real quick, I want to talk about the audit of the federal programs. I think I've covered everything of the financial statements, but on the audit of the federal programs, so that begins on our report for the audit of the federal programs begins on page 92. And then on page 94 is the city schedule of expenditures of federal awards. We are required to do we're required to assess the risk of federal programs. There's a de minimis amount by which we don't assess risk, and that de minimis amount is set at $187,500. If the expenditures of a program are below that amount, we don't do any risk assessment on those. If a program is above that amount, we do, and then we'll based on the risk and the dollar amounts, we'll select a program or maybe more than one. And this year it was one. It was the Community Development Block Grant. That was the program that we audited. We test the internal controls that the city has for compliance, and then we'd actually test for the compliance with the requirements. We issued an unmodified opinion on compliance, meaning that we believe that the city complied in all material respects with those requirements. We also did not report any internal control findings. So the city's audit with regards to the uniform guidance single audit was met a high level of assurance as well. So I will point out that, the city was approved subsequent to year end for, a significant amount of CARES Act relief funds. Those weren't in the last fiscal year's audit, but they will be in this fiscal year's audit, the 2021 audit. And so we'll tell you right now that that will be a program that we will be auditing this year. So, and then lastly, Gerald mentioned the separate letter to governance that you received. It should, it's about a 7 or 8 page letter or something like that. Really, there's not a lot on there to report. The main thing that we always like to report is that we did not have any disagreements with management regarding the application of any accounting policies or any accounting principles, any scope of the audit. We did not encounter any significant difficulties in working with management on the audit. At the end of the audit, we always require that management provide us with significant management representations concerning the financial statements and the federal programs, because they are their, everything in there is their responsibility. Everything in this report is the responsibility of management, except for the actual audit reports themselves. And a lot of the representations, are we allowed unrestricted access to anybody we want to talk to? And that includes any of you. And the answer is always yes. So, management does not restrict our access to any personnel or any of the members of the city council or anything along those lines. So, anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Gerald, was there anything that you wanted me to say that I may have overlooked? Okay. Sure. All right.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would just say that I believe we have an item on the regular session to accept the audit. Hopefully you'll feel comfortable doing that. Would you like Mike to stay for that? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, Mike, you can stay if you want.
All right.
For working with us, and especially since so much was, we came up and worked in the field, but we also work more remotely than we normally do. And I know that probably put a little bit of stress on them, but we certainly appreciate all of the work that they did to give us everything that we asked for in a timely manner. So.
Okay, good. Thank you. Right. Item 3.2, demonstration of toolbar functions in the GIS Viewer.
I got to say, Morale, this is exciting. I've been looking forward to this little lesson you're going to give us.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Here we are looking at the City of Enid GIS Viewer. So currently, Enid is, we have about 60 layers or data sets we maintain on a regular basis. You can see all the utilities like on water, sewer, storm sewer, and fiber. We call them as the utilities, and they are grouped in each and every system. And we got planning. So in planning, we keep track of site plans, subdivisions. So I can just go to it, like we can turn on, so it can show you all the site plans that have been done throughout the city of Enid. If you can zoom into any one, we can click and it will give you the plans when we did and little more information on each and every, like the drainage reports and also the site plan. You can clearly pick up what happened and what are the infrastructure. So it's all on our fingertips. This is like a monster. I mean, as much information we can provide it, it's keep on, like it's every day, it has to be feed the information. If you don't change it, it's like a newspaper. You are using yesterday's paper, yesterday's information. So every new project we do it, we will come back and put the information here. So it's a constant updating. And we got all our projects here. Once the project is being accepted by the commission, so we will put back the project here into the GIS system. Here you can see a little more details. Right here is the layers. So you can, all the layers are assigned based on the type. And here is a search bar. You can search based on the address, or you can like parcel information, fire hydrants, valve information. So they are all being geocoded. And you can measure, select layers, and you can measure them, like how big each lot is, or you can turn on some layers. And so this is very good for like a preliminary engineering or preliminary planning. Because all the information is right here in front of you. If you have any specific questions, I can.
There were a couple things I was going to, before I forget, when we were talking about the skate park location, for instance, Jerry, I had, we mentioned that piece of property that we owned that the skate park eventually went to. The only reason I knew the city owned it was I'd been playing with the GIS system at one point, and there's a layer that's under easements and land called deeds.
Yes, sir.
And if you check it and then zoom out, you can see every parcel that the city of Enid owns in city limit, which is really useful in a lot of ways. But the context we were talking about this a couple weeks ago was and Morali, maybe you can just, if you would go into the East Broadway corridor and show the overlay with the fire flows. I'm trying to remember it's under public safety. No.
Are you trying to show the fire flows or just the parcel?
The fire flows in the water system. There we go. It's under the water system. I thought it was just interesting, like zooming in where we have replaced a water line, like the big one on East Broadway, just how big a difference, even just by moving a few blocks over on the number of blue fire hydrants at 1,500 gallons a minute or PSI or whatever it is anyway, and red fire hydrants. And then when you look at the east side of town, in the areas, the older parts of town where we haven't done a big water line, how many of those red fire hydrants we see and how big barrier that is for any kind of redevelopment.
Right.
At least that was the context we were talking about that not long ago.
And I have created another map just for the fire flow information. So like if you're talking about just the, like here for the provisions of what the improvements does when you do, we can show you some improvements right here. So these are all the improvements that have been done throughout the Enid since 2014. Just for the example on the Broadway. So these are all the red fire flows. As you can see, once we have done the improvements.
So that's what they were in 2014.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So after the improvements, you can see in the 2020, they turn to blue. Especially if you can see on the Randolph, Broadway, and Main, you can see the difference. So just for the purpose of what the improvements does, how the fire flows will be improved. And the other location I can show you is the Elm Street. So where we have the school right here on Elm and Madison. So you can see all these blue hydrants. That's in 2020 fire flows, but in 2014, they're all red and orange.
And then just to connect that last dot, where there's a, and this may be a Chris Bauer question, I don't see him, but maybe you can answer it, where there's only red fire hydrants within so many feet, the additional zoning requirement for any development, you have to have all this additional fire protection, whereas if you got a blue fire hydrant within spitting distance, that's all way, way low. Ken, maybe you can distinguish, and I just, the additional cost of doing even a small development, if my understanding's right, when we don't have that fire flow is crazy.
Yeah, I'll be making another presentation here shortly that goes into detail about what's required for fire flows and that sort of thing. So I hope I'll be able to answer those questions for you in a few minutes. So.
Riley, this happens to me all the time, but when it goes bajiggity on you, and is it best just to shut it down and restart it?
Yes, sir. This is Windows, so you just best close it and turn it on.
I'm on an Apple thing, so they never get along anyway. So I've been playing with it for a couple of days, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just goes off, and then I don't know what to do, and so
just close it and reopen it.
Sometimes you turn it off, and then you come back to it, and it's right in that same spot.
Yep.
So I haven't learned. Is there a secret button?
I think like computers have the cookies, so it will recognize where the location you are on the last time, so it will open back to you.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay.
I had a question, Morali, about one of the layers, and there's a layer for fiber optic, which we've all been kind of interested in.
Yep.
And there's a choice for a distinction between city-owned and not city-owned fiber optic line. But all that shows up is a little bit downtown, and I know there's fiber optic running up and down Van Buren because my office is connected into it. I know there's fiber optic running east-west on Randolph because that AT&T fiber optic screwed up our stormwater project there. So are those layers, that layer that's not city-owned fiber optic lines, is that incomplete, or are we missing that?
I think the fiber optics, it's only the city-owned. The not city-owned is like a service lines, just wherever we can find when we are doing the projects. Because the private utilities, they don't give us where the locations are. So whenever we are doing any project, whenever we find it, we will put it back into our system. So in the future, we will know where it is.
That would be kind of interesting as we are looking at, in the future, our internet infrastructure. It would be useful to have a better sense of where, if there was a way to get from AT&T where their fiber optic infrastructure runs. I mean, can we ask nicely? I mean, is there a trick there?
We tried, sir.
We tried? Okay.
Yeah, I would love to have like all OG&E, ONG, AT&T, everything in it. So it's easy for us to design because it's delay for construction, design, everything. But they will give us the hard paper copies, but not hard copy, not digital copies.
I mean, that was that stormwater project at Randolph and 4th Street. AT&T, I think we didn't know AT&T had stuff there. And then all of a sudden, there's 25,000 strands or something like that.
Yes,
okay, well, if there's ever an opportunity to get that information, it sure would be nice to know where there's already fiber optic lines run through town, but I understand it's not easily available. But maybe something will come up one of these days.
I'm impressed with the sophistication of the system. The users are still working on the sophistication over here. This is an impressive database you have. Has this been shared with the county assessor's office or with the 811 ask before you dig folks?
I think like the 811, city uses their own utility locates. So like, I don't think there is an 811 public viewer. So every utility company, they have their own. Whenever you call for locates the utilities, they will come and locate it for you. So there is not a one database, people can go there. So city uses this a lot for the locates.
But outside of that, it has not been shared.
Right.
I thought we had some sharing with the county assessor's GIS system, that
Yeah.
there was some data sharing there.
It's very minimal, like a zoning layers, anything that is not any issues with it. So we just provide it to the public.
Raleigh?
Yes, speak on it.
Raleigh.
How would someone that's watching, if they wanted to use it, they weren't someone in the city staff, how could they get access to it?
Currently, it's not. It's only internal viewer only, like all the city staff. We have not released this to the public yet because of, this has a lot of information, like maps and the improvement plans. So we are still kind of working on what are the information we can share and what not. So it's not been budgeted.
Is it your intent someday to let them use at least
Yes,
part of it?
Yep.
Okay.
The main purpose is like this data is not a dictionary, like it cannot take this as granted. So when I give it to public, when they will say, okay, these property lines are showing where it is, but it's not right. So, I cannot argue with them. This is only the map. So it's a location purpose only. Whenever if you need anything in the field that needs to be done by a surveyor or locator. So that's
We share the city of Enid, the ward map is
Yes,
an
sir.
overlay from this
Yep.
that we link from. So is there a way to share specific layers? Just pieces of it more publicly?
Yeah. So like that's how we share the zoning map layers and ward maps.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item number 3.3, discuss waterline infrastructure gaps in the city and an action plan to address them. Chief?
Mayor and Commissioners, excuse me. Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you tonight. Get my slides going here. We're always excited to talk about and support the idea of building our water infrastructure in the city of Enid. So this picture, I'm not in this picture, by the way. I think Chief Jackson may be the guy on the left, I'm not sure. But no, I share this picture for a couple of reasons. This is an apparatus we acquired in 1910. It was our first motorized truck. It did not carry water. It had a chemical extinguishing system, and it carried a hose to support the other steam engines that we had at the time. I've seen notes that I think we purchased this for about $2,000 in 1910. In contrast to that, we have two engines that we have ordered that we hope to take delivery on in April that are $638,000 a piece. So a little bit of difference there. But what it boils down to is that we can buy all the trucks and hoses and pumps and nozzles and things that we want. But if we don't have water to put in those, we can't put wet stuff on the red stuff. We don't get to put the fire out. So we're going to be challenged to fulfill our mission without a good water supply to do that. Our mission statement for the Enid Fire Department from the time we were organized in 1902 includes two major objectives, the first of which is prevention of personal injury and loss of life, the second being saving buildings and property. One thing I wanted to point out in relation to that is that the discussion we're having tonight about water and a water supply, a sustained water supply for firefighting, is much more of an issue and is primarily to support the mission of protecting property. It's much less of an issue or somewhat less of a factor in life safety, and I'll explain that just briefly. The best chance, the best way to survive a structure fire is to have early warning and to escape the fire. You know, by the time it's discovered and reported to us and we get trucks on the road and we respond to it, that's precious time that if people do not get out of the house by the time we get there and they're relying on us for rescue, their odds of survival are much, much less. Our fire department rescue efforts begin immediately when we arrive on the scene, and we do it with the water we bring with us. A hydrant or another water supply is established during or after those rescue operations take place, typically. So with early warning, most occupants have evacuated before we arrive. Many times we arrive at a fire scene and the family is already out of the structure. It's very rare, actually, that we have to take people in to rescue people from a fire. And that's largely because smoke alarms save lives. And so as far as the life safety aspect, a good smoke alarm with a 10-year battery in it is somewhere around $25. I'm not sure what it costs now to put in a fire hydrant and a water line. But for life safety, a focus on early warning and early escape from the fire is probably the most important thing we can do. But in order to conserve property, we need to focus our attention on water, and we certainly have some challenging areas in relation to that. We respond to all structure fires with the 3 closest engines, our rescue, command, and either the ladder or the tanker, depending on where that fire occurs and depending on what we feel we need. We have areas identified in town already that we know we have a challenge for water supply, so we automatically dispatch the tanker rather than the ladder to those locations. If we need the ladder as well, we can dispatch another engine company to bring that to the scene. Each engine carries 750 gallons of water, and that's enough for an initial fire attack and for those rescue operations. The tanker is automatically dispatched, as I just said, and it brings an additional 3,500 gallons of water with it. So a sustained water supply from either hydrants or tanker support provides for larger fires and longer duration fire operations. There are many structure fires that we never connect to a hydrant because we're able to extinguish it very quickly with the water we have on scene immediately. So, additional tankers and dump tanks can be dispatched for tanker shuttle operations or extremely large operations. And so the sustained water supply is very important to property conservation, but somewhat less of a factor for life safety and rescue of victims. This is a scene from a fire in 2005 at 3515 North Lincoln. You can see on arrival, we had flames through the roof. It was a wood shingle roof, which was contributing to that fire spread pretty quickly. I think it was a fairly windy day that day as well. And this is the result of that fire. We were not able to save the structure, partly because of its location and the water that we didn't have available to us. This image shows the location of that fire. You can see the yellow X there. It's on North Lincoln, just south of Tulane. And those hydrants that are shown up on Purdue didn't exist at the time. Those were put in as a response to this fire, was my understanding. So we didn't have hydrants on either Lincoln or Grant or Tulane or Purdue or down south on Oxford. Our nearest hydrant at the time was down here in front of Crossland Park, almost half a mile away, over 2,500 feet. That creates challenges for us. This is another fire. I've shared this in the past when Dr. Van Hooser was on the commission. This was property he owned at the time in August of 2007 at 406 East Robertson Road. This was not the main home on that property, but it was a guest house, is my understanding. This is what we found when we arrived there. It's further out of town. It's not inside the city limits. Response time was less. I think the fire was discovered, after it had significant fire growth to begin with. So this is what we found when we arrived. And this is what we had 22 minutes later for lack of water supply. At this fire, 406 East Robertson Road, a little over 2 miles outside of our city limits. outside of our developed infrastructure and hydrants and water mains. There's another area there on North Highway 81 where we have new hydrants that didn't exist at the time. Water's been extended up to the 81 Ranch area and some of those other businesses further north of that on Highway 81. But those weren't there at the time of this fire. For this fire, our closest hydrant was 4.4 miles away. We did use tanker shuttle operations for that. We had assistance from some of the rural departments to help us. We had our tanker, this is ours, that carries 3,500 gallons. And the other departments responded with us. We set the dump tanks up and they were all bringing water and putting into those dump tanks, and we pumped out of those. We eventually extinguished the fire, but we were not able to save the structure. Now, both of those fires, incidentally, did not involve any injuries or loss of life. Everyone was out of the structure when we were called, is my understanding. As far as hydrant locations, we have adopted fire codes. We're currently under the 2015 International Fire Code, which is part of the whole International Code Council code set that we use, the building code, the residential code, the fire code, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, it all comes from the same publisher. But we are currently in the 2015 edition of the International Fire Code, and it tells us where we need hydrants. It tells us how far apart they need to be spaced for new development, new construction within the city. Here it tells us where required, where we build a new building, anything hereafter constructed or moved within the jurisdiction, if it's more than 400 feet away from a hydrant on an approved fire apparatus access road, then on-site fire hydrants and mains shall be provided where required by the fire code official. It further kind of explains, that 400 foot is a hose lay distance. That 400 feet needs to be from any point on the exterior of the building, okay? Now that's primarily for commercial buildings. There is an exception for residential structures, R3 and U. They have a 600-foot rule for those. So that distance is extended to 600 feet where we're talking about a 1 or 2 family dwelling or a group of townhouses that have fire separations and that sort of thing. There is also, for buildings that have sprinkler systems, even if they're commercial buildings, that can be extended to 600 feet for sprinklered buildings as well. We flow test our hydrants every year, normally in the spring. That we're not just opening them and flowing water a little bit, we're opening them and flowing them, flushing them somewhat while we do it, but we're also measuring the pressure and calculating the gallons per minute that are delivered from those hydrants. Pressure is certainly a factor. Gallons per minute, the volume of water is what's really important to us. But we use the measurements that we take when we flow those, and we calculate what we call a 20-pound residual measurement of gallons per minute. When we just open the hydrant and we let water flow out of it, and we're measuring how much is flowing out under its own pressure or under the city provided by the city water department, that's a measured amount of water that we can calculate. But if we're going to be sucking on that hydrant with one of our engines, we're going to be pulling water from it. We can get significantly more water by doing that, but we have to limit how much we pull, because if we suck that line dry, it's going to collapse. So we always maintain a minimum of 20 pounds residual on the intake side of our pump so that we're not pulling those lines dry, not risking that we're going to empty them out and they're going to collapse from the weight of the ground around them or something like that, or cause damage. So there are a couple of layers in the GIS system that show hydrants. There's one that just has the hydrant raw data that gives a gallons per minute. Then there's another one that has the additional calculation that shows the 20 pounds residual. So if you're looking at that, don't get always the one that's important to us for what we're talking about today is the one that's calculated at 20 pounds residual. If we looked at the other map by itself, we wouldn't have any blue hydrants in town. They need that additional calculation to tell us what we want, okay? But as a result of this flow testing, the hydrants are given a classification and a color coding, and this is based on NFPA 291. This is not something we made up, it's a national standard. A class 2A hydrant flows greater than 1,500 gallons per minute. A class A is between 1,000 and 1,499, and a class B is between 500 and 999, and a class C is less than 500 gallons per minute. It has very little use to us for firefighting operations. And we do have a number of red hydrants remaining in town in older areas with older infrastructure that needs to be updated at some point. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. The IFC also tells us how much water we need, how much water we're expected to have available when we approve and build a new structure. It tells us that an approved water supply capable of supplying the required fire flow shall be provided whenever we build new structures in the city. And part of my job is reviewing site plans that are submitted to the city for new development and new construction. And basically there are two things I look at. Do we have a fire protection water supply that's adequate and meets the standard of International Fire Code? And do we have access to the building that we need for our fire apparatus? Pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple. The fire code says that we have to determine the fire flow required by an approved method. There are a couple of different methods, and we'll talk about that too. The first is a set of tables in the appendices. Appendix B of the International Fire Code itself provides us some guidance on that. This table is in reference to 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses. And you can see highlighted that you probably can't read it on the screen, but for a single family dwelling up to 3,600 square feet, which is a pretty large house, we're required to have 1,000 gallons per minute available for a duration of 1 hour. For commercial buildings, there is a separate table that goes into a little bit more detail, and we have to see the table starts at 1,500 gallons per minute, which is the beginning level of a blue hydrant. So a minimum standard of a blue hydrant for at the top of the table, that's 180,000 gallons of water that we're supposed to be assured that we have available to us before we approve that a structure is built. On the top side of it, it's almost 2 million gallons of water. Our fire protection classification comes from our water supply. But they provide this formula that comes from a 34-page document that boils down to this, that it takes into consideration the type of construction like the table did, but it also talks to the type of occupancy, how the building is going to be used, what kind of people are going to be in the structure, what kind of activities are taking place in that structure. And then it also looks at exposure to surrounding buildings, and it takes into account the communication between buildings. So if we're going to have connections between buildings that fire could spread from one to another, it's taking those things into consideration. So you've got multiple factors to plug in to get a number from them. A little more complicated, and many times when I'm doing a site plan review, I don't have all this information to work with. Sometimes I can get it later. Okay? My policy is that I try to use both methods and choose whichever has the lesser requirement for our developers. Sometimes, as I said, I don't have all of that information available to me. If we have flow tests of a hydrant in the vicinity of that structure that are within 15% of the calculated required flow, I'm going to accept it. You know, when we flow test hydrants, we don't really know what other demands are on the system at that time of day. You know, if we flow at 10 o'clock in the morning when everybody's home running the washing machine, it may have a decreased volume available for us for our flow test. So I recognize that there are fluctuations in that based on time of day and the other demands on the water system. So if we're within 15%, I'm going to accept that site plan or approve it. There is also an exception in the International Fire Code for sprinklered buildings that allows us to reduce the required fire flow by up to 75%. Down to a minimum of about 1,500 gallons. So for larger buildings, I can you know, if they're willing to put in a sprinkler system, or if other parts of the code require a sprinkler system, they can get a credit for that, for the water we have available to fight a fire from the exterior. So for any site plan applications that have water lines and hydrants available, but they appear to be deficient for one reason, before I decline that, or, you know, I'll make comments and I'll let them know that there's an issue there, but we will go and reflow those hydrants. We'll work with the public water department and see if perhaps there's a closed valve someplace, some kind of restriction on the system that's accounting for that deficiency, and then flow again and see if we can get where we need to be to approve the site plan. This is a screenshot of a 2012 map of our hydrants from the GIS system. I took this from a similar presentation I did in 2013, and this was the information I had available. The shape of the rectangle is a little different because we didn't have widescreen computer monitors back then, but this is what it looked like. And you can see we've got a lot of blue hydrants over on the west side of town and a pretty good cluster of red hydrants in the east and south quadrants of town. This is the current map from 2021. And I can jump back and forth between those, and you can see pretty significant changes in that period of time.
Hey, Ken, can you point out where the downtown area is?
Sure.
Thank you.
Try. To focus in on a couple of specific areas, this is also from the 2012 hydrant map. This is from Oakwood to Van Buren and from Root to Garriott. So I guess this is Indian Hills area. You can see we have a lot of orange hydrants and a few reds in this area back in 2012. And this is what it looks like today. So we have made some improvements. We've done some connections to some larger lines, put in some newer water lines that serve that area, made a pretty significant improvement. That area to the upper right that still shows some orange and reds, my understanding is that we've made some new improvements there recently, and we don't have new flow test information about that yet, but I expect to see that area change as well. This is the Forest Ridge and Brookside area back in 2012, and this is what it looks like today. You can see on the north side of that, there is a new line coming south from Garriott into the west side of that development where they had some new homes built in the last few years. That contributed pretty well to the better flows on the west side of that development. So once again, here's my image of the 2012 hydrant map and the change to the 2021 hydrant map. If you want to look at that better, Morale, I think, is giving you a link to where you can look at the two layers and zoom in on areas and kind of focus in on areas that you want to pay particular attention to. We were asked as the fire department to show you areas that we felt were significant challenges for us right now and kind of prioritize those. The first that we want to look at is the Southern Heights and Garfield addition. Now, I've always referred to that whole area as Southern Heights, but in looking at it more closely recently, the bottom portion of that where all those red hydrants are, I think is actually called the Garfield addition, and everything north of that is Southern Heights. But this is a little bit closer view. It's a little bit hard to see that area, but the whole southern tier of that is all red hydrants. This is the New View apartment complex on South Leona Mitchell. We have 9 buildings plus a clubhouse, have 76 total units there. The fire flow requirements calculated by either the IFC or the ISO calculation method give us a requirement for each of those buildings anywhere from 2,250 gallons per minute to 3,000 gallons per minute. The hydrants there, you can see the one on the north side of the development provides us with 414 gallons per minute, and the one on the west side has 313 gallons per minute. So we would have significant challenges trying to extinguish a fire in that complex. It's going to be a delay for us to get significant water there if we have a larger fire there. Now, the upside of on the life safety part of that is that we inspect occupancies like this regularly. At least once a year, we ensure that the owners are providing smoke alarms for that early warning and early escape for their residents. They're providing fire extinguishers on, for each building. And we're inspecting to eliminate those hazards that are likely to cause fires. It's not going to eliminate it. It doesn't mean that people don't have a risk or a hazard there, but it does mean that, we're kind of ahead of the game for life safety, but we would have serious challenges at protecting those properties or containing it to a single building and not letting it spread to another one. Okay. Second area that we'd like to focus on is Park, Oklahoma, and Cherokee from the railroad tracks to the east, all the way over to, I think it's Lakeview there by the old Phillips campus. They have done some changes on Main, Broadway, and Randolph, and some more recent changes on Maple that aren't reflected in this map yet. We don't have those flow tests available to change those colors. But Park, Oklahoma, and Cherokee still have a significant number of red hydrants. We can pull water from those other areas, but we're going to have to lay a lot more hose to do it. So this is an area we'd like to see some improvement as well. And then the third area that we would suggest, I'll show you some, forgot that I had this here, but this is kind of showing an example of some of the flows, 493, 427, 278 gallons per minute. There's one there that's back up, above 500 gallons per minute, but those are all pretty insignificant flows for us to really have what we need to fight a fire with. This is an aerial image of that area, moving a little bit further to the east, showing the types of structures that are there. I'll back up to this first one again. You can see here on the left-hand side, that includes St. Mary's Hospital. We have some hydrants there on the south side of the hospital that are really not sufficient either. Fortunately, that's a very well cared for, maintained building with fire inspections and automatic sprinklers and alarms and all that kind of thing. So it's not a huge risk in that regard. But, if we did have something in that area, it would be a significant challenge. Another area that I would like to see get attention as part of this is the Cherokee Terrace apartments there just east of the hospital. Yeah. The nice thing about them is that they're largely non-combustible. They're mostly masonry structures, except for the roof structures. They've been recently remodeled. That's another situation where we have an opportunity to do inspections on a regular basis and try to eliminate some of the hazards that might cause a fire in the first place. We have newer apartments there. We have the Prairie Flats apartments just to the east there. And then on the far east side of that image is the Roosevelt Park apartments. Once again, those are all newer structures with automatic sprinkler systems to protect them. So their fire flow requirements are significantly less because they have their own fire protection. Moving a little further east, it's mostly single-family dwellings, older homes, and then continuing on to the east side of that. So the next area that we're recommending that gets some attention is the Kenwood Historic District. And that's primarily because we have another cluster of red hydrants there, quite a few. You can see these are the typical flow tests there, anywhere from 148 gallons per minute to 398 gallons per minute. None of those are sufficient for effective firefighting, but we do have higher value, larger two-story homes that we would have significant challenges in being able to protect from fire. So we'd like to see something happen there. This is an aerial view of the types of homes in that area. And those are our recommendations. And I'll show you one more picture just from our archive. We have a really nice archive of the history of the Enid Fire Department and the incidents that we responded to over the years that most people never get to see. So I like to throw these in once in a while. This was the Esquire Theater in March of 1969. Gregory Peck and Eva Marie Saint were showing at the time. Can't see the title of the movie, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
First question is, as far as future development, what type of impact do you think this would have? Would this completely shut down future development, or how do we have a plan of action in place that will help customers to be able to build houses if that's something that they would like to do?
Well, if we follow through with our recommendations for the areas that we've talked about and the other areas that are still deficient, then that will satisfy the requirements of the fire code so that I can approve site plans. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the basic requirement for any single family dwelling up to 3,600 square feet, which is a pretty large house, the fire code says that's 1,000 gallons per minute for a duration of 1 hour. I also stated that I typically, if we have a flow test near that location that provides within 15% of that, which would be 850 gallons per minute, and it's within the distance of 600 feet for that classification of occupancy, then that's going to be approved as well. So we have areas where I can't approve. We have areas that, just depending on exactly where you are, how close you are to that nearest hydrant, and how much that hydrant flows, I may or may not be able to approve. But if we were going to look at that area down in the Garfield addition at the south end there by New View Apartments, currently it wouldn't be eligible for any kind of large development, any kind of a large structure. There's not enough water there even to build a single family dwelling right now. So we're hoping to address that. From my perspective, it's more to protect what's there existing, but it will also support future development. And it'll be up to the engineering department to determine the best way to accomplish that. We've talked to them a little bit about what size line they would bring down there to do that. One of the problems that they will need to address there that they mentioned to me, that in my world of fire protection water supplies, I don't think a lot about water quality. Wet stuff is wet stuff to me. But because they're in that area, there's not a lot of demand or consumption on that water either. If they put in a large enough line to give me everything I want to fight fires, it's going to be largely stagnant. It's going to be sitting in the lines, and they're going to have issues with water quality rather than water quantity. So they have to balance that equation, I believe, and that's above my pay grade. I don't know how to do that, but I know they are aware of that issue, and that's one of the things they have to take into consideration.
Okay. I noticed that one more question. I noticed that you said that the recommendations come from ISO, which is the insurance division. My question to that is, the houses that are like in the Kenwood area, that are pretty valuable historical houses, do you think that those individuals that own those properties, does that cause the insurance costs of those properties to be a lot higher than what their value because of this situation? Or
they all fall within our area of, our fire protection classification of 2. But then from my understanding, talking to some insurance people, it's kind of hyphenated. If they don't have a sufficient hydrant within a certain distance of that structure, there's a hyphenated thing there that kind of changes their rate somewhat. So yes, I believe it does affect their insurance rates to be in an area that has insufficient water. I don't know how much that is. They are benefiting from the fact that we have a fire protection class for the city of Enid of 2. We have 5 stations around town, and we've earned that classification through the things we've done. We have other areas in town, especially on the perimeter of town, that don't have that water infrastructure either, and they're farther away from a hydrant or even a main. They may be a mile away from a sufficient hydrant in some cases and still be within the city limits. They still get the fire protection class of a 2, but it's hyphenated because they don't have a hydrant within the required distance, and so there's another factor there to their rate.
Yeah,
I'm not an insurance guy, but that's the way it was explained to me.
Yeah, it just made me wonder, Ken, that, a homeowner in that area, you have your rebuilding construction value to a property, would they be accounted for, as far as liability and loss of value? Because it's really not on them, it's on us. The situation that we're dealing with right now is not really the customer's fault. It's something that we have to fix.
It's more of a question of maintenance of existing infrastructure rather than expanding our infrastructure. When we have new developments on the perimeter of town, and there's no water there, no water line, it's normally the developer's responsibility to pay for those improvements unless we've got some other incentive program in place to do that. But in areas within town where we have existing infrastructure that is no longer really sufficient, then yeah, I agree. It's probably the city's responsibility to have some kind of program in place to make those upgrades.
Thank you.
Can I answer anything else?
I have one other question.
Question that I wanted to answer was just what Derwin said, is that I didn't want to scare the heck out of everybody in Enid, but that we have a rating of 2, and it's because we have an excellent fire department that has very quick response times, and we've got fire stations all over that can respond quickly. So that was out of the rating of 2. What is the lowest? I mean,
Well, the best is a 1.
1.
I think there's only one in the state. I think that's Midwest City.
And then how high up does it go?
That's-
4, 5, 6, something?
Well, if you're outside of the city limits, it's a 9.
Okay.
So
All right. That's enough. Thank you for me.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question for you. What percentage of your fire hydrants do you flow test every year?
all of them.
Every one of them?
All of them that will flow. I mean, we come across some that have a problem. Either there's an obstruction somehow that we can't get to it, or it needs repair or maintenance. We can't get it open. So we just flag that for some kind of repair or maintenance, and then we come back to it later. But our policy is to flow every available hydrant every year.
One follow-on question, not related, is when someone comes in to get a building permit to increase the size of their house or their commercial facility, does it come to you to look at?
The commercial buildings normally do go through a site plan process. A lot of the time, if someone's just doing an addition to a regular single-family dwelling, I don't see those. They don't come across my desk.
So it could still be in the district, the Waverly district, and someone's adding on to that house. They don't have to be concerned about the fact that they don't have the fire protection that you think will be needed.
Like I said, there are criteria that I'm not completely familiar with about which buildings go through a formal site plan review and which ones don't. I know all the commercial development does. Some of the residential doesn't. If there's already a structure there and they're just making some changes to it, sometimes it doesn't go through that process and doesn't come across my desk. Now, it doesn't change what the fire code says. It just means that I don't have an opportunity to address that sometimes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
And what percentage of the fire hydrants in Enid are the red or the lowest flow category?
I was afraid you would ask me that.
Approximate.
I've worked on some spreadsheets, I think out of a little over 2,000 hydrants that we have in town, we have somewhere around 200, about 10% of them that are red currently. And I had been trying to put some numbers together to compare, how many red, green, yellow, and blue we had maybe in 2012 versus today, but I've not been able to complete that. But I think it's somewhere around 10 to 15% are red.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I think that we're going to have to, I know that there was one more presentation tonight. It's up to you how you want to proceed. I know we're close to or over time to start the next meeting, but I want to tell you we'll have a part 2.
That was all of them. I think that was all 3.
No, as part of this presentation, Derwin Norwood Sr. has a presentation as well as part of the waterline discussion. So to give him fair time to do that, we might need to pick it up on February 2nd, or I guess you could decide to do it right now. We'll just delay the start of the next meeting.
Let me ask you, sir, how would you like to do that? We don't want to make you return. If you're ready to do that now and would like to do that, you can. If you'd like to return and have more time to do it, then you can do that. On here. Okay. Yeah. If you're not going to be able to finish it, it might be better to do it the next time then, because that way it'll be more cohesive. You'll have the whole message together. Do you think? Okay, go ahead.
I am Derwin Norwood Sr. I'm the pastor of the West Side Church of God in Christ here in Enid, Oklahoma. The reason you all haven't saw me much lately because I've been in Tulsa working for the last 3 years for our jurisdiction. I'm the second administrative assistant to the bishop over in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I do a lot of work over there. But I did a lot of work here in Enid. And I actually started doing work here in Enid in 1968 when I was hired for summer help for the Garfield County Health Department by Dr. Cecil Reinstein, where we tested the water wells, we tested the dairies, and we looked at burnt and dilapidated houses which got burnt in 1968 in the riots across United States. But most of the time they keep it quiet that never happened here, but it did. And I was one of the ones that was instrumental in getting a lot of the houses tore down. I left home, I came back in 1990, and my mother had problems with her water. And I went to the city of Enid in 1990, and they told me that they were gonna fix the water problem in Southern Heights. They put a line across the street from her and fixed her water, and I think one other street, and that was it. And right now we have a problem in Southern Heights Addition, Southern Heights and New View, the New View Addition. I didn't have any problems when I first came back, but later on, I guess they changed administrations because I know every 4 years you get voted in and voted out. And each administration has their own programs. And I have had to fight with the city of Enid on several occasions. But we thank God that he saw us through. But what we're doing at this time, we're trying to move some more houses in the Southern Heights addition. We have the, up on the screen, we have different houses and things that we have moved in. In the blue is all that we've remodeled, and most of those I remodeled them with my business because I had 2 construction crews at that time. Then in the purple is homes that we moved in. Oh, could you go back? In the purple are homes that we moved in. The yellow is church-owned property where we want to put 3 duplexes and 4 duplexes and 3 homes. And then the church is going to buy some more property. The green is a new house that's been built within the last, I say 8 years. The other green on our is my property where my wife and I have planned on building our home. And that's why we were looking into this, because we're planning on building a home this year and found out that we have such a water problem that should have been taken care of. And I know that it's not, you all didn't do it, but I thank God for the mayor and the board of commissioners that we have now, because I've been to a lot of meetings and I saw your interactions and I like the way you do things. There used to be an open door policy for me at the city of Enid, where I could go and talk to just about anybody because I did so much work, not only in that area, but all over Enid. And so I thank God for you all giving me this opportunity to let you know where we are and what we're planning on doing. But I'm trying to understand why come the problem haven't been fixed with the water pressure. I'm trying to understand that because as I said, I addressed this problem in 1990. I worked with several of the people that were in the city of Enid at that time, like Bill Painter, Sheila Demetrio. I also worked with Denise Thacker and Gary Thielen, worked with Sue Ellen Singer, worked with Dorothy Jones. I worked with Carla, and I worked with Chris. And I thank God that some of them are still there that knows who I am and know the work that I've done here at Enid. I went up to Enid, to the city of Enid, because I was building a wheelchair ramp for one of the members of our church that was 92 years old, got stricken with the COVID virus. And I had a problem because they said they couldn't find anything on me. And I had to go back and get everything that I ever gave to the city and redo it. I didn't understand that because I know that the city of Enid has files and they can go back and they can see what you've done here in the city of Enid, especially the amount of work that I've done. I'm trying to understand because I know that Enid, Oklahoma was not getting block grant money, CDBG money, community block grant monies until my brother, Ron, and Byron Mitchell went to Claretta Scott King in Atlanta. She met them in Washington, D.C., and had an investigation put on the city of Enid to see why the city of Enid was not doing anything for the blighted communities. The investigation team came, they told the city of Enid that what they were doing was wrong, and they have got to start putting money back into those neighborhoods. The fathers of Enid told them that there was no problem here. They did not need the money. When people were hurting, we got the money here, but every now and then we get a new administration in that forgets who got the money here in Enid. If it wasn't for Operation Uplift, which became CDSA, it started out as Operation Uplift, then it became CDSA, where Gary Thielen and Dorothy Jones started CDSA. This is how we got the monies. I went and talked to Gary Thielen, talked to Dorothy Jones. I talked to Sue Ellen Singer, and Sue Ellen rode around with me to see what was going on in the neighborhood. And she told me, she said, Derwin, this should not be. She said, I will make sure that we get these houses done. Now, could you pull that up? Or can I do it here? Okay. This is remodels. These are remodels where people put in their own money. CDSA did some of them. Rental rehab, which was CDBG money, did some of them, but the people in the community had to have matching funds. Now you see my name there. I have 5 houses there, which I did myself. I did them myself. I didn't get no money from anybody. And now I'm fixing to build a home, my own home over there. I'm not looking for any handouts. This is how many remodels we had done. We had 17 remodels done. That was through Norwood's Construction and CDSA and the rental rehab with the city of Enid. So you have already put money into the community. The people that lives in the communities have invested their money in the community. But it seemed like we have to pull teeth to get things done, and it shouldn't be. I have two other people, one here in Enid, just moved back from San Francisco, that's wanting to build her house, and she's wanting to build a duplex. I don't know if you all heard of Bishop Henry Porter, Philip Henry Porter. He was a part of Promise Keepers. He helped create Promise Keepers. This is his sister that moved back from San Francisco, is wanting to build a house back in the community on their property and then build possibly 2 more duplexes. I have another family that's been calling me from Houston, Texas, and they want to build 2 or 3 houses also. But we've got to get the water lines fixed. Now, these are houses that we moved in. These are houses here that we moved in. And so you see how much we've already done to the community. Some of you all don't even go over that to see what's going on. But there's things that are done and there's things that need to be done. And I hope that you get a copy of this, and I'm fixing to let it go because I told you I wasn't gonna hold you. I hope you get a copy of this so that you can see what we've done. What we've done. So this is urgent. This is urgent that we get the water system fixed over in Southern Heights. I think the fire marshal said that they just redid it in Brookside. And what was that in 2012? Or is he still here? Was that 2012 that you did all that in Brookside? Was it 2012 when you did all that in Brookside? When the city did all that in Brookside? 2012. I'm talking about 1990. This was reported back in 1990 and nothing is still been done. And something's gonna be done one way or the other. It's good to know people. It's good to know people. And like I said, I like your enthusiasm. I like the way the mayor does things. And I like the way the city council work with the mayor. So I'm asking you tonight, please help us. Please help us. I would like to build my house this year. I'm 66 years old now. I'm not doing a whole lot of work. It's time for me to start relaxing. It's time to start relaxing. I have worked ever since I was 8 years old. And it's time for me to start relaxing. And I want to build a nice home for myself and my wife. Amen. A lot of you all know my wife. She works at the bank. A lot of you know her. And this is all we want. All we want is something nice. And we don't want to build a house and then it burns down and nothing we can do. And then they'll say it wasn't valued at what we built it for. We don't want that. We want you to please help us. Some of these are from my congregation. They have property over there. It was more common, but a lot of them are afraid of the COVID virus. And I can say that the COVID virus is not a joke. I had it. I came down with the COVID virus and I almost got out of here. But the Lord brought me back. He brought me back. They put me down as critical. They took all my medicine away, took all my vitamins away. One thing about it, it's good to know Jesus. I know y'all don't want to hear that, but it's good to know Jesus. And that Tuesday night, the Lord stepped in my room and healed me. And I'm healed right now. Don't take this as a joke, because it's not a joke. And I thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me this time.
Thank you, sir. And I'm glad you're still with us.
All right. You hit the slides real quick of the pictures, just real quickly just to show you what we've done in the area. And a lot of this help that we received was with Jeremiah Heron and the Forgotten Ministries. donated a lot of their time, me, myself, for free. So I just want you to just kind of show the slides of the pictures to see what we're preparing for. And these are members from the college here, Northern Oklahoma College, from the baseball team. And those are children from Hennessy High School and Junior High School.
That's some impressive
Thank you.
redevelopment work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Norwood, I want to thank you for all the help that you've done over there on the cleanup and leading that effort. You're really making a difference in a part of town that I agree has been long looked over, and it's time for us not to do that anymore. So appreciate your help there. All right, we ran a little bit over, but I think I need to probably give my fellow commissioners a little comfort break. So it's 6:49. Let's get back together at 7 o'clock. So take about a 10-minute break and we'll be back. Thank you.